Okay, so good morning. I guess people will continue to move in. Personally, I'm here with two different hats as the co-founder and CTO of GreenWave Technology, and also as an ETH Zurich part-time employee. I've been involved with Lucas Group since many years with, let's say, something that you could consider a little bit like the ancestor of Pulp, that was a many core architecture that then evolved to something that was more friendly from an energy point of view. So what I'm going to present today is a product we are about to tape out that we call GAP8. Which is a Pulp/RISC-V derivative that is geared toward the IoT space, something that we call an IoT processor. First, GreenWave as a startup, we are incorporated since a year and a half. We are based in France, in the Alps, in Grenoble. And of course, this is the reason I am there, we are strongly rooted into open hardware. So, what do we want to do? I mean, if you take the, let's say, the existing system that you can see on the left-hand side, you are going to find IoT nodes with two roles. I mean, on one end, data acquisition, and on the other hand, pushing data over the air through some fixed infrastructure like cloud. I mean, so for the time currently, I mean, the system you will find on the market are either really teeny nodes with limiting sensing capability. The details are not that obvious, but what I want to show there is basically temperature, pressure, humidity, sensors, little bit of motion. So this is fundamentally compatible with IoT networks a la LoRa or Sigfox, you know, few kilobits per second. But then, as soon as you want to scale up, let's assume you want to hook a microphone, a camera, or richer motion sensor, then, well, with the traditional IoT network, it's going to be tough. So you need to rely on much higher bandwidth network, which also means significantly more power. Huh? So, and you know, at the end of the day, all those nodes end up aggregated into the network. And the services that are, you know, the things you can imagine doing out of the data you are collecting are going to be mechanically limited, both by resources and by power. So this is where we hope to come with some elements of solution, with following the idea that the node itself should be much more autonomous in terms of processing capability. So meaning that, you know, for example, if you take an image, you can either consider it as raw data, and then you are on the upper part of the diagram, or you can look at it from its content. And its content, you know, it's going to be in most of the cases a collection of simple indexes. So you reduce by several orders of magnitude the amount of data moving from quantitative to qualitative. So this is having a number of side effects. As you can see, the pipes in between the node device and the infrastructure is going to be much thinner, so, and will become compatible with low data rate network. The power budget overall is going to be significantly reduced compared to a centralized solution. And also, I mean, there are a number of desirable properties. I mean, so of course, less power. The fact when you move from raw data to high-level data, you remove lots of information. And this is going in the direction of structurally enhanced privacy for the data. So I think that none of us like the idea of having raw pictures moving to the infrastructure because you don't know what's going to be done with it. Huh? And also the fact that you move to a more qualitative view on, of data opens lots of avenue from services that you can build around it. So the key word there is, remaining within the power envelope and the cost envelope of what is an IoT node. How can we significantly increase the compute capability? Yeah? So, as I said, I mean, there are really two folds. There is one fold that is communication, and then one fold that is sensing. So, let's say, on communication, somebody asked a question during Davide's presentation about, radio integration. I think that radio integration at this stage for IoT market is a bit of an headache. It's highly, heavily fragmented, so you have, proprietary solution like LoRa, Sigfox, then you have Zigbee, and you have, tons of different protocols. Of course, things will shape up with the 5G, for example, and are already starting to shape up, but currently, I mean, making a decision of integrating the radio frequency part and betting on a standard is at least a dangerous game. So you can look at it differently and consider that fragmentation is part of life, and the traditional way to fix fragmentation issue is move from hardware to software. So. And software in this case means software-defined radio. The other driver, which is more on the sensing space, is, as I said earlier, is you can view data analytics as the last frontier in terms of data compression. I mean, because you really remove all the details and keep the meaning. Huh? So. There is a huge number of approaches, the traditional one based on, segmentation, support vector machine, clustering, whatever you want, and also all the, the new methods that have blossomed during the 5 last years based on offline learning. Yeah? So, due to the large number of possible approaches, I also believe that their flexibility is absolutely essential, and flexibility is again software. Nevertheless, for the sake, and looking at the amount of computing resources that you might need, for example, for offline learning-based approaches, there is also a room to combine software approaches with hardware specialized blocks. I mean, something that was briefly discussed by Davide before he ran out of time in his presentation. Huh? So this is the, the argument for flexibility. Then, of course, the other driver is it's definitely energy. I mean, energy, if you look at whoever is communicating those days for IoT device, they said, okay, 10 years of life on a battery. It must be a bit over-optimistic, or the battery needs to be a very special one. But nevertheless, it's absolutely essential, and it's a fundamental enabler. So there are key drivers that we have been using. So be lazy, which is something that is extremely natural, I think, which that you can reformulate as adapt resources to the job with maximum agility. So don't throw resources when it is not needed. So we'll see then into more detail what it means on hardware side and software side. And also, something that seems to be stupid is make sure that when you have nothing to do, you don't burn power. I mean, an IoT node, in most of the cases, is going to have idle time. It's going to be in idle 99% of the time. So there, to be ultra efficient, state retentive, when you have nothing to do, is what will make the difference in terms of battery life. Okay, so out of those key drivers, we are coming up with this GAP8 processor, I mean, which is, as I said during my introduction, a derivative of PULP. That you can, GAP, it's a device that you can see as a threefold device. First, a set of relatively autonomous IOs, or peripherals. And the rationale there is to make sure you can use them and keep the rest of the circuit quiet. Then there is a second fold, which is something that I could call a highly energy efficient microcontroller, the usual microcontroller, no more, no less, but state of the art in terms of power. And its role is going to be interaction with peripherals, standard lightweight OS's support, and also secured execution, mostly because security is becoming a major requirement for in the IoT space. And finally, like some sort of a schizophrenic device, there is one big guy on the other side that you can turn on. It's parallel core base number cruncher. Which is there for to offload heavy-duty jobs, and that can be tightly coupled with hardware specialized blocks, and it's of course power switchable, following the idea that well, we don't want to consume when we have nothing to do. Okay, so if I look to the top-level view of what is GAP, so on the left-hand side of this diagram. Surrounded by a dotted line, which means a voltage domain and a frequency domain. This is what I described earlier as a microcontroller, I mean. So a collection of peripherals, a core that is called a fabric controller, a big memory that can be state retentive, and, in our case, an integrated power management, which is a mixture of IP, DC-DC converter, real-time clock, Again, the idea is whenever you need to wake up fast. I mean, so on this, all the peripherals are controlled by this vertical box that is called micro DMA. That is really leveraging on the fact that there is a huge asymmetry in between internal frequency and relatively low frequency peripherals. So there you can really come up with major simplification. And this is a system that you can consider as relatively autonomous. So whenever to a peripheral, as soon as you attach a bit of intelligence close to the peripherals, there are lots of decisions that you can take very close to the sensor before starting moving data in. So I will come back on it later on. Then the right-hand part is the big guy. I mean, it's an 8-core based parallel processor. I will not redescribe what Davide described very well in the previous presentation. So maybe one point there, beyond the usual resources, there is a specialized block that is there for helping for offline learning based approach à la convolutional neural network. So few top-level features. I mean, a counting, since the core is having vectorial capability, multiplying by the number of core, blah, 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 you can say that, and combining with the hardware C, that you can go up to 12 GOPS. Of course, with a power budget that is not going to be 1 milliwatt. Huh? But the cool thing is that under very small workload, you know, 1 milliwatt is very reasonable. Huh? You know, the standby power, as I said, which is highly dimensioning, is around 3 microwatts. Mostly because most of the IPs are shut down, electrically shut down. The memory stays retentive, and there is only an embedded RTC that is making sure that you will wake up in the future. Huh? So it's a circuit that we are taping out in the 55 nanometer low power. In terms of memory configuration, I mean, memory, you always need to have more. The point is, for the IoT market, as soon as you consider adding a memory controller, the PHY of this controller, when you switch it on, will burn you 10 times what your circuit burns, you know. In other words, you will end up with around 100 milliwatts only for the memory controller. So it's highly desirable, but not affordable. So we are trading off having a fairly large L2 memory that is half a megabyte, and that is isolatable by sub-blocks, again, just to make sure that you don't burn power when it is not needed, I mean. And since this memory is retentive, you don't need to back up the content, the state of the machine when you turn off the circuit. Because it would be the default scenario, move the content, your state, through, for example, the Quad SPI interface to a flash, but as soon as you do it, then you burn a lot of power. Okay. So from looking at it more from software, through the software angle. So as I said earlier, the left-hand side is a microcontroller. So there are a couple of requirements, in my opinion, which is supporting existing execution or integration model, you know, like Arduino for the integration model, ARM Mbed for the execution model, and more generally, lightweight OSs. There, the support for secured execution is really important, in my opinion. In terms of programmability, this is standard C, C++, so there is not much to say there, except that there is a support for on-chip debug to ease the debug on the real-life chip, I mean. So whenever you need a boost, then you move to the right-hand part, and there, I mean, it's C, C++, and OpenMP, again, as presented by Davide before. Also supported with on-chip debug available. And there, I mean, the rule of the game is going to be vectorization first, and then parallelization to get as much performance as you can with, you know, a fourfold goal. First, data analytic. Second, software-defined modem radio. Also, since we deal with communication, data encryption is also fairly central. And finally, as soon as we want to heterogenize software with hardware, combining a dedicated hardware block geared toward CNN with software. I mean. Okay. So a few words. Then I am switching my hat, and you know, from GreenWave to ETH, since I've you know, this is something on which I've been spending quite a lot of time to come up with a spec. Few words about the dynamic of the ISA. So we, as Davide explained, we started from OpenRISC, you know, and define a microarchitecture, and that I would, you know, supporting the original OpenRISC ISA. Then we moved to V2, which was adding, you know, hardware loops, and for the sake of having zero overhead iterators, and starting to increase the intrinsic level of parallelism of the machine without moving to a multiple issue machine. I mean, and the first category was post-modified load store, Mac MSU. Then we moved to a second round, which is still following this idea. I want to have, you know, some sort of multiple issue capable machine, but I don't want to pay the price for it. So the other avenue is splitting the ALU, and whenever you know, which is basically SIMD support, plus a number of let's say, extra feature to make it usable. I mean, what I mean there, the true difficulty with SIMD unit is the fact that you stay within the same dynamic. So this is fine for addition, subtraction, whatever you want, and this is highly problematic for multiplication, where naturally you need to double the dynamic. So either you go for traditional route, where an instruction taking register, a pair of registers will produce two registers, but this is major complexification of the microarchitecture. Or you take other routes, and this is what we did, mostly with this dot product or sum of dot product operator, which naturally extend to a larger dynamic. And it's proved to be extremely flexible and usable in plenty of situations. I mean, and of course, you know, as soon as you do vectorial, the capability to reorganize efficiently data in register is also absolutely fundamental for cycle, but mostly for energy, because the alternative is going back to memory and then back to register. I mean, so this is the role of the shuffling unit. Then, you know.
Could you just clarify, is that your own stuff, or are you taking the SIMD work and the Mac work from the original OpenRISC spec from 15 years ago?
No, it's the pulp contribution, the extension of RISC-V. Then, of course, bit manipulation for code density is something that pays a lot and doesn't cost that much in terms of hardware. And finally, you know, having some DSP flavor makes sense, even though the risk there is to be over-specialized, like Q15, Q31, then everything is magic, saturation, rounding. The alternative is to be more flexible in terms of fixed point scheme, like if I want to support Q3, Q7, Q20, can I slightly improve my instruction set to make it more efficient? I mean, like, you know, dealing with normalization, rounding, etc., etc. So, out of this first set of, let's say, extensions that were mostly prototype of OpenRISC, we moved to RISC-V, you know, following exactly the same scheme. And, you know, more or less, the microarchitecture is the same. There is more complexity in the prefetch part. So the net result is equal perf, but the great thing is minus 30% in terms of code side. And this is having a system level impact, which is major from the point of view of instruction cache sizing. Yeah? Then, you know, if I look to, you know, moving from V1 to V3 in terms of speed up, for the family of application we were having in mind, this is not something that is general. It's, you know, It is based on making some key assumptions of the type of kernel you want to support for audio processing, image processing, etc., etc. So we are getting, you know, on average, 3.7 speed up factor, so structural efficiency. The interesting point is, from an hardware point of view, it costs with 20% extra cost from an hardware point of view. So this is not free lunch, but it's definitely reasonable if you look at how much it gives you. Then, you know, refinement to understand better, I mean, what each generation gave us, I mean, which is likely better summarized in this next slide, where there the important message is, you know, up to 4 or 5 times in terms of performance improvements, and even more important, 3x in energy efficiency in improvements, which really matter, I mean, in our case. So, a few words about then I am switching back to GreenWave. What we call hierarchical power processing, that I will try to illustrate graphically. I mean, let's assume you are connected to a microphone, so you receive a signal that you sample with these guys, yes, QRS interface. So the first thing you want to do there, you receive delta sigma modulated samples, and you want to move to the PCM space, so better to do it close to the sensor. So this is clearly one thing that makes sense, being very close from the sensor. Then the other thing you can ask yourself is, do I have a sound? I mean, is there sound, an input coming from my microphone? So this is more or less doing some sort of dynamic average, and based on a threshold, saying, okay, yes, this might be a sound. Otherwise, you keep acquiring data, minimal processing, and skipping information. Whenever there is a candidate for sound, you turn on the first level of communication part, and you start feeding in data into the system. Then the next question is it a phoneme? I mean, from a signal perspective. So this is, you know, what I am showing there, and you know, is the result of a subband analysis, and there are, you know, specific signatures that are accessible by the fabric controller. Huh? So relatively lightweight processing. Huh? Then, if I decide that it could be a candidate for being a phoneme, then I need to understand if it's a word, I mean, and which word is it. Then, for example, there I am going to use a combination of, you know, subband analysis with a CNN-like structure, but for that I need to switch on this resource, I mean, and possibly also, yes, and possibly switch on my dedicated hardware block. So the rationale behind is you see this hierarchy of power. Most of the time you sample data. Whenever there is something, you switch on minimal data. Then you figure out if it could be something of value, and you escalate the compute hierarchy. There, the key word is you need to be extremely agile from a power management unit point of view to be able to turn on, have clocks up and running, etc., etc. So let me take another example of hierarchical power processing. So let's assume that you know, I'm having some sort of monitoring system that wants to figure out what is going on outside. And I'm assuming that this Fox is going to be a little bit noisy. So the first thing I can do is, I'm having an array of microphones, and you know, With a bit of front-end processing, figuring out the bearing is not that difficult. I mean, so this is what we call sound spatialization. So sound spatialization is going to give you a bearing, and you know, with this bearing, you will have a region of interest. And with this region of interest, you will be able to instruct the parallel interface of the camera that is having built-in region of interest capability to reject everything except the region of interest. So this is of fundamental interest because one of the limitations of this kind of device is, of course, memory. And if you start hooking 2 million pixel sensor, memory will be a big issue, unless you are able to figure out if there is a region of interest and smartly identify it and focus on it. So the content understanding will be performed on it. Okay? So, question, and it's, you know, it's going to be the second part of my presentation. So far, so good. I mean, the principles are just fine. But, you know, with respect to everything that I've described before, well, first of all, is parallelism the right answer? Because there is a large diversity of application, and how will the SoC behave face to real application from a performance scaling point of view? Other question, with you know, the various use cases I have described, are we sure we can stay within the lower part of our operating ranges? So for example, our SoC, we will end up with a sign-off of around 300 megahertz. Of course, the chip will be able to safely run at this frequency, but it's much better when you can stay within, let's say, 50, 100 megahertz. A few key assumptions there is from a radio point of view, as I said, most of the current IoT radio are order of kilobits or kilobytes per second. So I'm going to assume something a little bit more aggressive, up to 1 megabit per second, which is already make things like downloading small images over the air feasible. I'm also assuming that from an image sensor resolution, without you know, smart focus, VGA is, you know, the upper limit. Huh? Then I will focus first on digital baseband. You know, for digital baseband, there on the right-hand side, you know, you have an OFDM, and just to highlight what is going to be critical there, you know, it's going to be FFT, IFFT, you know, forward error correction, channel equalization. So this is what you see, channel equalization on the left diagram, computing the energy, computing the phase versus a reference, you know, going through soft value processing before, you know, in order to feed the forward error correction scheme. So this is what is structuring from the point of view of figuring out how efficiently we can tackle with it. Then we'll go through audio processing. So audio processing, I will, you know, look into the detail first of what does it mean to do subband analysis. So in order to have a phoneme signature of the audio samples, and then you know, common in between audio, vibration, and image. We'll go through the you know, what does it give if we want to use a CNN-like type of classification. Of course, everything I've said about speech is going to be applicable to vibration analysis. You know, vibration analysis, what is depicted there, if you take any machine with rotating parts, how it's behaved is going to be signed from the point of view, from a spectral point of view. So this is time to frequency transformation. then, you know, plenty of processing there. And finally, for image analysis, I will make a step-by-step analysis of, you know, convolution, pooling, and fully connected, and see how it's work, how it's behave on the machine, mostly from the point of view of how it's scaled, but also, you know, beyond scaling, what are the absolute number you can get, and how it's compared to the maximum envelope we are having on the chip. Okay, so, you know, there is a common denominator that you find in plenty of domain, which is the, something that I would qualify as a workhorse. I mean, it's FFT. I mean, so I'm taking as an example Radix 4 DFT, FFT. You know, there, the way it's going to be parallelized, it's a treillis structure, and you can dispatch several nodes in one layer of the treillis to the various processor. So on a Radix 4, it starts, you see the butterfly, it starts to be a fairly large butterfly. So it's mid-grain parallelism, I would say. And what makes the difference there is complex multiplication and complex rotation. So now, if I look to what we are getting on the measuring on the RTL, you know, there I am taking a complex FFT, transforming a fixed point Q15 samples. And what I am showing, there are three family of curves. You know, the one on the bottom is 256 points, and 1K points, and 4K points. And there are two curves. One is what we measure on the RTL, and what would be the ideal scale-up. Simply, you take the configuration with one core, and you divide by the number of core, and see how far you are from this theoretical curve. It's telling you a couple of things. Is how well you did your job from parallelization point of view, but also, more importantly, is the architecture behaving efficiently, and are you wasting efficiency because of synchronization, because of data hazards? And well, I think that it's you know, it's not perfect scaling, but nearly. And then what matters more is, in terms of absolute value, what are we talking about? I mean, you know, I don't know if you are familiar with those numbers, so what I suggest is, if I take as a reference, you know, the ARM CM6 complex Q15 implementation, taking the Cortex M0 as a reference point, and then going M0 plus, M3, M4, M7, then a single core, and then the 8 core. I think that you see that the speed up is quite nice. And the speed up there is a combination of several things. I mean, let's say vectorization effect, where we really get as much as we can from the core, and parallelization effect. And of course, the way we want to use it is reducing the clock, I mean, to do the same job. So let me, you know, I said FFT is a workhorse, so you will find it everywhere, and it's deeply rooted in the efficiency of the solution. Then when you do radio, especially on the receiver side, one of the things you have to do is you have to deal with channel estimation. So on the left upper part, you see what you have transmitted, and on the right-hand side, what you have received. And of course, this is not the same thing. And the difference between is on the curve on the bottom left, which is the channel effect on the signal. And you want to figure out what is the channel effect to recreate your original input. So for that, you need to agree, the transmitter and the receiver, on special preamble that you can use to measure the transformation matrix of the channel. So there you need to do filtering, FFT, energy, least mean square minimization. you know, so it's not that complex, but it starts to be serious. Huh? So how does it behave on gap? You know, I've taken as an assumption a preamble that lasts for 640 IQ sample. So this is for 802.11.4G, I think. And, you know, with a transceiver that is set at 128 megahertz. So you always need to oversample, so skip the details. So the net result is, you know, clearly for channel equalization, when you need to learn the channel, the better is to be able to do it real time. Because otherwise, you start accumulated sample that is turned into memory. So better to set the operating point just enough to be real time. So the question is, can we be real time? Huh? So let's say real time would be making an assumption which is 1 megabit per second at 128 megahertz. You know, if I look my megahertz for real time on the right axis, you see that one processor, we are pretty far away, 2 processors still, and we need to go down to 8 processors where we can perform channel equalization at 92 megahertz. So I'm within my budget, I'm happy, I don't need extra memory. Huh? So then the next step is still analyzing the radio chain. I mean, you need to protect data, not for privacy, but for integrity. And you need to use convolutional encoder or turbo encoder. So there I'm illustrating, I mean, let's say a convolutional encoder, so a Viterbi encoder, where basically you need to figure out, I mean, each single column in the treillis is, let's say, correspond to a state to something that you read on the input, and then you figure out the probability of is the input could be 0 or 1. And then moving and computing the metrics on column by column, you end up at a point where you start doing some traceback and you extract the most likely input sequence corresponding input sequence from the point of view of the emitter based on what you see on the receiver. So the point there is the parallelization scheme is, you know, on the one treillis column, and the size of the treillis column is conditioned by the size of the polynomial you have been using to perform convolutional encoding. So traditionally it's 7 bits corresponding to 64 states, meaning that you start to really have very, very fine-grained parallelism if you want to run this guy in parallel. So let me show you what it's give on the running on the gap 8. So the upper part is what we get, and the bottom part is the ideal curve. So as you see, there is start to be a significant gap, you know, meaning that yes, we scale up, but not with ideal performance. So let me show you why. I mean, so these are traces of activities, and I told you, you know, the parallelism grain is so small that there are tons of microfences, and those microfences are, you know, are highlighted in the red area and cause performance loss on it. But still, I mean, we scaled by a good factor of 4.5, 5, which is not too bad for a Viterbi, I mean. And ultimately what matters is, you know, again, I'm back to my 1 megabit per second. I need 52 megahertz. So 52 megahertz, I'm well within the envelope. You know, if I am assuming turbo decoder, it's going to be 3.5 times this figure, but it's still within. So, I mean, yes, I mean, software-defined radio makes sense. you remain within a very reasonable power budget, and because you are at an operating point that is relatively low. So the net result, in any case, compared to the radio frequency part, the budget in the transceiver will be well below. I mean, so yes, could be better in hardware, but you know, we can perfectly live with a software-defined based implementation. So once you are done with the radio part, you need to figure out how to protect data. So this is data encryption. So there I am describing, this block is describing the structure of an AES counter-based approach, where each block cipher is an AES on 128 bits, and instead of injecting the payload on the upper part, you inject a counter and an initialization vector that is, you know, generated on the emitter part, and send with, you know, an RSA or an elliptic curve key to the receiver. So, and finally, once you have ciphered this structure, you add your payload. One of the side effects is, you know, all those blocks can run in parallel. And the good news, this is exactly the scheme that is used, for example, for SSH. SSH works exactly like that. So what does it give when we run it on GAP? You know, you see, I mean, that first of all, and it's quite obvious in this case, it's nearly scaling up perfectly. But more importantly, you know, on 8 core, I am ciphering 2.12 bytes per clock cycle, which means that for 1 megabit per second, for an AES software implementation, I'm less than half a megahertz. I mean, so let's switch to learning-based method. So I'm going to use the CNN as a grid of analysis, going through convolution layer, pooling layer, and fully connected layer. So the convolution layer is simply a convolution sliding on a window that is going to produce one input. There, I'm first assuming that I'm having bytes pixel, and so I can benefit from vectorization and then parallelization. So the net result, you know, I'm ending up for a single convolution apply on the, you know, per produced output at around 2.3 cycle, which means for 25 sum of product, I mean. In other words, if I want to do a single 5x5 on a VGA resolution at 1 frame per second, I need 0.7 megahertz. Then I can do it on short data, so you have less vectorization effect, only a factor of 2, but still, I mean, quite reasonable, 1.44 megahertz. Going to pooling, so pooling is either computing max on a region or average on a region, and then summarizing this region by this value. I mean, okay, let me again making the difference in between Q7 data or Q15. You know, in both cases, you see that you end up at, you know, in between 2 and 4 cycles per produced output. And there we are really benefiting both from, again, parallelization and vectorial support. And now going to the fully connected layer, so it's, you know, some of weighted, sum of product. I mean, there I am measuring, I'm assuming to 2K input and 2,000 weights, you know, either as Q7 data or as Q15 data. This is to highlight the vectorization effect. So the net result, I mean, for those 2K sum of product, you know, you are in between 300 cycle and 500 cycle. Okay. Jumping to the conclusion, I mean, smart sensing on data-rich sensor is something that can be achieved on really teeny power budget, providing you combine a number of things. Hierarchical computing, just make sure that when you sense, you turn on resources when they are meaningful. And then, of course, you know, all the numbers I've been showing during this presentation is just to give you evidence that, you know, parallelism works well for a very large number of situations, and that, you know, Pulp as a microarchitecture and architecture behaves very well with burning very little overhead on anything that are not strictly fundamental. You know, and the net result is that with GAP we are having a solution that goes from, you know, 1 to 3 microwatts for the idle state, to the milliwatts range for the microcontroller, to, let's say, 5 to 20 for, on average, on the cluster. Of course, I mean, if you push everything to max frequency, you would be higher than that, but still very reasonable. Knowing, yeah. I've also been showing you that for, even for a software-defined radio approach, assuming 1 megabit per second, which is significantly more than the current IoT network, it fits very nicely within the device, and we can run at relatively low frequency. And just to conclude, I mean, this cool SOC would have not been possible without the huge background coming from, well, Pulp, and, you know, the contribution also RISC-V, I mean, as an initiative. So, since most of you guys are involved in those developments, I also want to conclude with a big thank you.